You know those days when the paperwork just piles up?
Simple Practice is the EHR that makes it all easier. Scheduling, billing, treatment plans, even notes. No wonder over 225,000 practitioners trust it. Check them out at simplepractice.com.
You're listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, where therapists live, breathe, and practice as human beings. To support you as a whole person and a therapist, here are your hosts, Curt Widhalm and Katie Vernoy.
Welcome back, Modern Therapists. This is the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. I'm Curt Widhalm with Katie Vernoy, and this is the podcast for therapists about the things that go on in our practice, the trends that happen in our professions, and sometimes it's us looking at things that we've encouraged over the past, and then there's almost kind of a spiritual bypass, I think, feeling in this episode that's coming up, but doesn't have anything to do with spirituality. So we have been good friends with TJ Walsh. He's an LPC out in the Philadelphia area. We met him through a lot of our Therapy Reimagined work back when we were doing conference, and he's been a longtime listener of the podcast. And
Woohoo!
he has a very wonderful Substack where he puts down some ideas. And there was one that caught my eye here somewhat recently that's just kind of talking about therapists, especially earlier in their career, some of the maybe wisdom that seems to be getting bypassed that he was noticing. And I said, Katie, we should get TJ on. He's never been on the podcast. Let's have him talk about this. And so I'm very excited for today's episode. Thanks for coming on, TJ.
Hey, I am really excited to be here. It has been a dream of mine to be with Curt and Katie. No, it's really exciting for me to be here to talk about this stuff.
We're excited to have you here and to talk with you, and it's good to see you after a while. But before we get into the whole big conversation, we'll ask you the question we ask all of our guests, which is, who are you and what are you putting out into the world?
Oh my goodness. People ask me that in different ways all the time because I'm very confusing. But what I'm putting out into the world is a mix of therapy, creativity, leadership. I'm an artist, first and foremost, and a creative entrepreneur. I do all different kinds of things. But what I really like to do is integrate authenticity, vulnerability, and self-expression into my life and my work, but really encourage people to do all of those things in whatever way it means to them in their life, in their work.
So the article that I had read, it's titled Too Much Too Soon, What New Therapists Are Getting Wrong. Can you lay out the main points of this article?
Sure. So, I hate to be, well, maybe I don't hate to be the old guy in the room, but
I really was wondering about introducing this episode. Are we at the point where we're just old therapists, like, yeah, shaking our fists at the new generation here?
The working title right now is Get Off of My Lawn.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. I've really tried to not be that person and try to take a step back and kind of try and understand what everybody or what folks are doing out there, especially people who are newer to the field, trying to start their practices and things like that. But there are some things that I notice not just with new therapists, younger therapists, but also for those of us who are, not afraid to be a little more visible. I do think, and what I was writing in that article or that post is that therapists, new ones, more visible ones, seem to feel pressure to prove their value really, really quickly, often like rushing to, express interventions or provide a lot of reassurance or push into validation, which, by the way, validation is a really, really important part of our work. But how do
yes, it is. Validation.
You're absolutely
You're
right.
so
good
valid.
job, TJ. Really good job.
Thank you. But how do we validate, and what are we validating? And when we do that, I see a tendency to bypass patients or clients' real process. Sometimes we're missing the transference that is out there, that's showing up. And at the end of the day, we're not really building a lot of real depth with our clients and our work. And so I like to go back to my perspective, which is therapy is about tolerating, and I think I said this in the article in some way. Therapy is about tolerating the slow work of relationship and not pushing for instant solutions. And so that is kind of what I was talking about. The article was a response to something that I saw on social media, got grumpy about, and then fired this thing off.
Oh, now I'm super curious. What is the thing that you were responding to?
Well, I mean, that might be a little bit more further down in our conversation, but it was something about neutrality and can or should therapists be neutral in their work? And they go off into this direction of, therapy is inherently political conversation. That how do we challenge people? We shouldn't really just allow them to do whatever it is we think is, wrong or bad based on our own perspective. But that's not really what neutrality is in the clinical space. And so when I see this stuff get pontificated online by folks, it really kind of pulls me back because it's getting away from at least how I was taught, the main purpose or the main focus of what that premise in psychotherapy is, and not what it means colloquially or popularly in the modern conversation.
It seems like therapy in the popular conversation is, and we've done a lot of episodes on this, so I'll link to those in the show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com, but it seems like there is almost a requirement, even folks who don't need therapy, quote unquote, need therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Clinicians are very relatable.
Yeah.
There's a focus on lived experience. There's a focus on feeling validated, like you were talking about, by your therapist, but also if your therapist is politically different from you, then that's a problem. There's a lot going on with how folks are viewing therapy and how it's being presented in kind of the TikTok space or social media.
Right.
And one of the things that you said that I thought was really interesting is that therapy is becoming vibe forward and clinically hollow. And so when I think about that, I try to sort through kind of relationship building and helping folks come into a space that maybe doesn't feel comfortable for them, or maybe, culturally or identity-wise, they've not been welcomed into the space, and maybe what should be different. But before I make assumptions, what do you mean by vibe forward and clinically hollow?
A couple things. So, I see a trend of therapists trying to build a brand on relatability, on aesthetic, on their social media vibe. So what they're putting out there to try and lure in people who might be a good fit for them in their practice, right? Trying to attract the right fit clients. I think that that's a good thing, right? We want to work with people that we're able to help or that fit our niche or whatever it is, right? And so there is a purpose for all of that. But then I see a lot of folks pushing into that really, really hard in so far as when they get those people into their consultation room, their therapy space, they continue to really present in this way that they've built an expectation for the client around, right? And so they're going to be super, maybe they're going to be super relatable. Maybe they're going to act as though they're friends with the client and present that kind of thing. Maybe they're going to be super opinionated and offer a lot of their own anecdotes and things like that, like they do on social media. And I think that becomes problematic. It creates a challenge clinically then to set the frame, to maintain containment of the space, to really do the work of therapy. And then what I see when that happens is therapy becomes reduced to validation. It becomes reduced to, personality, and it's not really grounded in the clinical depth that, and guys, this is from my own personal personal like perspective, right? So I think we have to hold that hold that line, but like it's not grounded in the clinical depth that I really like to see clinicians providing and holding to what we know works for people in terms of their change long term and their growth as human beings. So this creates for me a challenge because clients might start to feel like, oh my gosh, like I'm really comfortable in this space. I can maybe feel more like myself for the moment. My symptoms start to get reduced in the moment, but they're not really experiencing the real transformation that can be cultivated in a way that a long-term therapeutic, well-contained, well-grounded space could offer them. So it's like almost like designing this like really nice house and bringing somebody in, but there's like no foundation underneath it. It looks great from the street. It's comfortable inside, but underneath there's, a lot of stress and a lot of erosion happening.
Simple Practice's new AI-powered note taker records my sessions and then turns them into structured progress notes in just minutes, which means I can wrap up my day without spending my evening writing notes.
And for a limited time, Simple Practice is giving you a 45-day free trial of Note Taker. That's an extra 15 days when you sign up before January 16th, 2026. Get your hours back with AI-powered progress notes that generate key session takeaways just minutes after your session ends. Note Taker helps you remain HIPAA compliant, safely generate notes without compromising on HIPAA compliance or data security. Keep quality notes without typing, record your post-session reflections and turn them into structured progress notes. Stay prepared for every session. Quickly review key points before appointments, making it easy to pick up where you left off, and level up your documentation and reclaim your time with AI-powered Note Taker. Plus, get a 45-day free trial when you sign up by January 16th.
Everything I need is in one place, and it just works. No wonder more than 225,000 practitioners trust Simple Practice as their preferred EHR. You can see why at simplepractice.com.
I can imagine some listeners being like, but you just don't get how it works, man. And
Probably. And that's okay. I'm used to it.
But really what I'm hearing you talk about is that it has to be an authentic, having done your own work as a therapist on yourself in order to actually be the thing, not just project out this vibe and to kind of use the buzzwords and to portray an act of expertise. That some of the underneath work has to actually be there to have it be a continuous authenticity rather than kind of a work face or a fancy office or a fancy Zoom background if you're an online therapist or something like that, that makes it kind of a consistent top to bottom presentation.
Yeah, consistent top to bottom presentation. I'm like I don't really care if people want to have like really shiny looking image and stuff and present as like show your stuff, be out there with your image however you want. I'm more concerned really with knowing who you are as a person and as a clinician and having a really solid understanding of how to work with individuals and work with people beyond just giving them what they want to hear, right? Or something just to be relatable, just to hold them in the room.
And I know that you teach and supervise and interact with a lot of people entering into this profession. I have as well. And I'm reflecting back on being at that point in my career. And if I'm hearing us talk saying like, you got to know who you really are. And a younger version of me would be like, yes, I know exactly who I am. And
yeah,
I would be wrong at that point. There would definitely be some growth things. So what is it that you're suggesting as far as some of the reflection points that people should be having to make sure that this is not just vibe forward and hollow, but to be able to actually get to some of that authenticity?
Yeah, I just go back to like the basics of, having done your own work, however that looks for people. But I'm always a big giant fan of having done some kind of depth oriented work, of participating, being a client or a patient on a couch. I'm really a big proponent of that. And then ongoing supervision. Supervision for me is not just a means to obtain your piece of paper or your license number. Like, sure, we all have to get supervised in that capacity so that we can actually become independently licensed. But supervision for me is an ongoing experience that should travel with a person all the way throughout their career. And if you're not getting supervision, from my perspective, that's a dangerous thing, right? Because you're not getting oftentimes called on your stuff, or you're not able to work through some of those challenging transferential or countertransferential issues that show up in your work, and have somebody bounce them off and be like, have you thought about this? They're not, and the supervision for me, when I try to encourage people to get supervision, again, it's not necessarily like I have this crisis client in the moment that I need to get consultation around, right? It's I'm going and I'm doing my own therapy work through the lens of my clinical work. So it's having done your own work, have you been on the couch, right? And by the way, you don't have to be on the couch, but what I'm saying is like not necessarily going and working on like, some specific issue where you're undergoing CBT or something like that, but you're actually like doing insight depth, really getting to know yourself and to know where your stuff is hiding, so that when it pops out at you in the space with a client, you're prepared for it and you know how to navigate it. So therapy, supervision, and then also developing yourself creatively is really important to maintain flexibility, to maintain the ability to think quickly, on your feet, abstractly, critically, and all of that good stuff.
So there's a lot of places I want to go. So I'm going to go to one. I've got one comment and then also a question, and it's kind of challenging a little bit. So I'll just put that out front. There's oftentimes, and that's why I joke that the title is get off my lawn or
Get off
whatever. But there's oftentimes, and I think Curt and I do this sometimes too, where we see the TikTok therapist, we see folks talking about therapy from a client perspective and the things they like or don't like from their therapists. And it feels like there's assumptions being made that folks who are out there vibe forward may be clinically hollow when they come back to their offices. And I'm wanting to see where is the data on that? Who are we actually talking about? Are we talking about kind of what we worry is happening with the next generation, or are we actually seeing these things? So that's the first part of it. And then I'm
Mhm.
also thinking about some of these recommendations are coming from, I feel like kind of like a specific clinical orientation, a
Yeah,
specific definition of what therapy is. And I
yeah.
know that I'm not a short-term 10-session CBT therapist. I can be solution focused in the moment, but I really like that clinical depth. So I'm with you kind of my own
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
philosophically, but I know that there are therapists and there are people who need to be in more
Mhm.
of that, let's get down and solve a problem
Oh,
and get you out in
100%.
5 or 10 sessions. And
Mhm.
so I'm trying to I guess, to nuance here. Who are you talking about? How do you know they're actually doing these things? And what does it look like for the whole profession? Because I think there's some of us that want to get into that deep, wonderful, rich work. And there's some folks that are here and saying, we don't have time for it. People don't, it's very privileged to stay in therapy for a long time and have those deep relationships. Does your advice actually apply to everyone?
Yeah, well, I don't think that any advice ever applies to everyone.
Fair enough.
So, and I agree with you that yeah, there are situations, there are times, there are people that have a very specific thing they need help with. They need to get from point A to point B, right? And there are approaches out there that do that really well, and that they're needed. I don't disagree with that. And then also, I will say that, yeah, like, it comes from some of what I'm saying, maybe some or a lot of my tone is privileged, right? So I will say, like, I'm a bald white guy, right? And I know that, what I say comes from my own personal experiences and all of that. So, I do want to recognize that as well. To your point about, like, where is their data or anything like that, like, I'm speaking from what I have seen in my supervision practice and in my work bouncing around different programs and how they're teaching students. And also, again, anecdotally, what I see on social media, which is probably the weakest point there, right? It's
Sure.
And yeah, you're right. Like, I don't know if, you know, Susie Q therapist is going to be, going back to their office and not doing good work. I don't know that unless I'm in the room, right? Or unless I'm supervising them. But I'm thinking about, when I see this stuff on social media, how the public, how the consumer of therapy is going to see that, respond to it, apply it, and then have some kind of expectation for what they're going to get when they go into the therapy space. I also think, to go in another direction about, short term versus long term. I don't think that it necessarily has to be about, the client staying in long-term therapy or anything like that, but it's more for the clinician to know themselves really well and to understand what's happening in the room for them, even if they are conducting a short-term therapy, even if they are more solutions focused or more protocol driven or whatever, because, you know, we're still having stuff come up inside of us all the time, and it can dictate or inform, the moves we make on the chessboard, so to speak, with a client that I'm more concerned about, and how they go about getting and gaining that insight and that experience about themselves may look like laying on a couch and doing therapy with a therapist for a long time, or it could be some other mode that is helpful in gaining that experience.
I think what I'm hearing, and to take this out of just kind of pearl clutching concern about the younger folks kind of thing, is I agree with you. We're not in the room with these other therapists, but we
Yeah.
are in the room with the clients who are consuming
Yeah.
this social media, and they're coming in with some of these expectations, and we're correcting them about therapy isn't this one size fits all thing. And that's really maybe more of kind of this emphasis that it's what is therapy like with me
Mhm.
that can be out there. And it's being able to actually follow through and walk the walk and show that even within our own practices, we're not doing, the same exact thing with every single client. It's not a cookie cutter approach. It's not just kind of come in and I'm going to validate you in the way that your friends are.
Mhm.
And that is hard to explain. And it doesn't make for great 30 seconds TikTok, pointing at post-it notes and various editing sorts of things.
Right.
And therefore it doesn't gain a lot of social media traction because it is a deeper following of ourselves, and it's being able to understand that. And that's really what I'm trying to say as far as moving this conversation forward is that's what that work is it's being able to convey not everything is just going to be how I show up on videos, and be prepared for that to be explained when you get into the office or get into the therapy session.
Mhm. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, like, I mean, if I were to, like, put the way I do, I'm hilarious in sessions, and I'm all these things, right, with my clients when it's warranted and stuff like that. But, in general, if I were to, like, give somebody looking at a social media feed, like, access to, you know, being a fly on my office, it's probably gonna be pretty boring content, right? Like you're saying. So yeah, how we show up on 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 social media, on video or whatever is probably going to be pretty different. I think it comes down to really like how are we orienting the client to the therapy when they do arrive. So the more like animated or social forward stuff shouldn't be that different from who you are as the real person in the room with the client, right? So they shouldn't be like super surprised when they show up to your office or show up into your Zoom room and you're completely different. They shouldn't be surprised, by that. But how are we orienting them to the work, right? I saw something before I came on here and I didn't spend too much time looking at it, but there was a post by somebody who was trying to figure out what do you do when a client comes in to you and they have this really massive issue that they expect you to solve for them in 50 minutes. And when they don't get it solved in 50 minutes, they see what you provided as a disservice to them, and they're really upset about that. And this therapist that had posted this, I really loved that they were asking this question because then they said, "You know what? I really need to I'm looking for feedback because I'm aware that I have set my clients up with this expectation and I want to learn how to not set them up with that false expectation that we're going to be able to solve these pretty big issues in 45 or 50 minutes." Right? And how do I then orient them to what the process of therapy is, which is not that much slower, much more, exploratory, especially for these bigger core issues.
I think that's not very sexy, right? And it's certainly
No,
not
it's
great
boring.
marketing to say, "You're gonna come in, I'm gonna be pretty boring, and this is gonna take a long time."
Yeah,
I think that's the challenge that we face is that we're
such
we're
a challenge, right?
potentially squaring off and trying to compete with coaches and self-help apps and potentially AI therapists and all of these things. And many of us are charging a premium to sit with us for a very
Mm,
long time to move very slowly through this stuff. And so I feel like the challenge here is both expectation that is completely unreasonable, marketing, which if we market what therapy truly is, sometimes that's going to potentially repel a lot of people who would get a lot of benefit from therapy. And one of the things that you talked about in your article is that there's therapists who want to solve problems and they want to be helpful and fix things for their clients. And it
yeah.
feels like that's a very human need and all of those things. And so maybe we've been kind of dancing around it. Maybe you can describe what you think, like your definition of what therapy is and how maybe we should be talking about it more in public spaces.
I will say, yeah, like, we we are screwed when it comes to, like, the marketing of how TJ views therapy, because I'm not gonna promise one thing or another. That would be not genuine. The way I view therapy and the way that I've experienced therapy, and maybe this is where it comes from, right? It's how I've experienced therapy. I've been really, really lucky, privileged, whatever, to experience life-changing therapy that has taken 20 years to get to where I am right now. If I had just gone to therapy I started going to therapy for a very specific thing. I had an eating disorder. I was anorexic, and I needed to get that taken care of, or else I would probably have died, right?
Mhm.
Then through getting that taken care of to an extent where I would be able to learn more about where that stuff comes from, I moved into a different type of therapy, which is more psychodynamic, more long-term, more relational, more reparenting, more containment, more all of this stuff that I could handle. So I think there's room for all of us in this game, right? Like if I didn't have that LCSW who was also an RN, like taking me and saying, "You have 2 choices. 1, you do this therapy and you take what I have to say seriously, or 2, you go inpatient hospital right now because your numbers are looking pretty crappy and your heart's gonna explode." Right? If I didn't have her, my heart would probably have exploded and I wouldn't be able to do the stuff that I'm talking about right now,
Sure.
which is really the relational work to get me to understand where did I come from? How did I get here? Where do I want to go? And then how do I ultimately land there?
Really, what you're speaking to is clients might show up to therapy for the vibes, but that doesn't necessarily elicit what the core of their issues are. And therapists who are focused just on the vibes might not be able to ever get there. And that leads to unsuccessful therapy. I look at the number of pre-licensed people in my practice that I encourage to find their voice and their niche and their preferred clients. And they end up with people who come in for seemingly right fit match sorts of things. And then session 5, session 6 bring up something completely out of the blue, unrelated
Right.
that some of that deeper work doesn't prepare people for. At least in my practice with a wonderful top-notch supervisor, there's a lot of being able to make the shifts and be able to catch up on some of the work or to be able to work on some of the skill areas that need to be developed. But really, when there are people out there who are in solo independent practice without that supervision or ongoing consultation, that poor preparation reflects poorly on us all.
Hmm. Mhm. So are you speaking to about new therapists who move directly into a private practice scenario or situation?
The ones who have the opportunity to kind of select their caseloads. And typically, that's going to be in private practice
Right, right,
sorts
right.
of
Yes. Yeah.
situations that are woefully unprepared for the variety of clinical issues that are going to be presenting.
Yeah.
And, my practice, we do take on higher risk clients than I think a lot of private
Sure.
practices around us are. And my team, especially as they're working through building out the first part of their caseload, often express surprise. Oh, this level of severity in private practice.
Uh-huh.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
our business model here. But
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I think that tends to show up for any number of places. Eating disorder clients, you bring that up earlier, that might
Mhm.
want to come in for the vibe, but don't ever get asked kind of the harder questions to actually have to face that.
Right. Oh, yeah. I This is like a whole nother conversation, right? That I think is important to to have, which is around how do we navigate that schism, right, of experience and prep when so many new therapists and even interns and stuff are going towards the private practice world instead of going towards more of these more broad programs, right? CMH or whatever it is, and not seeing right up front the breadth of clinical issues that can come up. And that's where I go back to, you know, well, not go back to. I don't have any problem or much problem with people who know that they wanna go into private practice or group practice going in that direction. I think that's great, but that's where we need to have good supervision, good training, good good mentorship, right? Where so that when they do get confronted with some kind of like volcanic eruption in their room with a client who was supposed to be like, super just trying to work through this thing,
Life
um,
transition.
life transitions, they're not totally caught off guard. So do you have a supervisor if you are if you are independently licensed and you're in private practice and you've never worked anywhere other than a private practice or a group practice? Have you seen these things? Maybe, maybe not. And if it does come up, do you have a supervisor who you can go to and who you can say, hey, like I was at minute 32 of this session, and all of the sudden there's this gigantic thing in the room that I've never seen before and I didn't realize I was going to see, right? That's really important to have that in
Yeah.
place, right?
Yeah.
And then also the other question, the other issue is like the advice that we receive on Facebook pages and things where we're trying to curate our practices with the clients that we want and everything. And then the immediate feedback is like, oh, you have to refer out right away.
Sure.
Right. So, this is part of like the vibe that we're cultivating, not really lining up with real clinical experiences. And then what do we do about them when they show up and make it all work together?
There's a whole bunch of episodes that we've talked about this, so I'll put a lot of links in the show notes over
Yeah.
at mtsgpodcast.com. But I wanted to get back to a point that you had mentioned earlier, because it seems like this is where things started, which is this concept of whether therapists should actually be neutral. And this, I think, speaks to the vibe. It speaks to validation. It speaks to lived experience. Therapists are fully human. And Curt and I have talked about this before, but I was just curious because you put a lot of importance on neutrality and getting to transference and those types of things within this article. Why is neutrality important? What does neutrality actually mean in therapy? And not just like, hey, you can do whatever you want and I'm not going to push back.
Yeah. It's about containment, right? Neutrality for me is about containment. It's about the alliance that we are forming with our patients, our clients. It's about how and when we disclose things, right? A lot of, some of the stuff that I was responding to in this, you know, quickly written Substack post
Mhm.
was about disclosing where we stand on every little thing when a client is coming in, often in an effort to be relatable to them or to, repel them immediately so we don't have to deal with them. I'm gonna make ourselves more comfortable. And it's has to do with confusion around our roles, right? Trying to take away clients' agency. So it's not like we're neutral, we're not gonna say anything, and we're not going to have any feedback for a client, or we're not gonna challenge them, right? Neutrality for me is, how do I hold the space? How do I contain it? How do I handle the stuff that comes up for me, countertransference, right? And how do I then use it or not use it? How do I manage the transference that comes in the other direction, right? And, it's maybe that's the thing. It's like, it's how do I contain? How do I hold? How do I manage spillover or not? And it less about like letting people know that, you didn't vote for the particular administration that's in power right now or not, right? Like whatever. I would say like this is going to get me in trouble, but I would say we probably don't have to discuss that. And I think there could be actually a lot of richness and depth that can come from working with somebody of a differing persuasion than you. And you might be able to see some really awesome growth and maybe even change if that's what happens. for that person because they were able to sit with you and you were able to listen to them and work with them in ways that they're not used to, as opposed to saying, hey, you know what, this person is a blankety blank and, I can't work with them because they rub me the wrong way. Well, a lot of people are going to rub you the wrong way and are going to have problematic perspectives, but we need to learn how to work with that and contain that and challenge when appropriate.
I'm really taking away that it's something where, and I think, Curt, we've had other conversations like this, so I'll keep adding links in the show notes, but our job is not to work with people who are like us, or only work with people who are like us, who share similar beliefs and who we can kind of vibe with. It's about getting into the process of change and being able to do that through the relationship and being able to sit with folks who are different from us, who may have different goals or values, and be the therapist they need versus just showing up as our unfiltered, authentic self and saying, accept me or not. And I think that's oversimplifying, and I think that there's a lot more nuance to that conversation, and we're way long on time, so we have to finish up. But I think there's that element of trying to create a little bit of nuance in the larger conversation. Yes, lived experience is important. Yes, being relatable can be important, but that's not necessarily the work of therapy. The work of therapy is opening those spaces to have the harder conversations and be able to really move through the yuckiness that can be the change process.
Yeah, 100%. Katie Vernoy saying all of the things that TJ was trying to say in a much more succinct way and in a way that makes sense.
Where can people find out more about you and your practice?
Sure. So if they want to find out about my practice, they can go to tjwalshtherapy.com. If they want to find out about coaching and consulting opportunities, speaking, wanting to get me to come in and drone on for a long time, they can go to tjwalshcoaching.com. I do have the Reflective Practitioner Circle, which is a space for therapists, healers to come and process their own stuff and talk about things that we don't often get to talk about out in the normal supervision and consultation spaces. So I have that. You can find that on the site. And then, anytime anyone wants to come and talk with me and get some feedback on their stuff, I'm happy to hear from them.
And we will include links to all of TJ's stuff and all of the other episodes that Katie is referencing in our show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com. Follow us on our social media. Join our Facebook group, the Modern Therapist Group, to continue on with this and other conversations. And until next time, I'm Curt Widhalm with Katie Vernoy and TJ Walsh.
If you're tired of juggling a dozen different tools, Simple Practice is your one-and-done EHR solution. Over 225,000 practitioners are already simplifying their workflow and saving hours daily. You could be too. Learn more at simplepractice.com.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. Learn more about who we are and what we do at mtsgpodcast.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter. And please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes.